The silence of the Northern Ural Mountains is not empty. It is a heavy physical weight, a pressurized atmospheric layer that suppresses life. In the winter of 1959, specifically the night of February 1st, that silence was momentarily broken on the eastern slope of Kalatsiakl. The indigenous Mansi people call this place the Dead Mountain. It is a barren, treeless shoulder of rock and ice, a quintessential liminal space where the geography itself seems hostile to human biology. What happened that night remains one of the most enduring anomalies of the 20th century. It is a data set that refuses to resolve. To understand the Dyatlov Pass incident, we must first strip away the decades of internet folklore, the conspiracy theories regarding Yetis and secret military tests, and look strictly at the frozen tableau left behind. We must act as forensic observers, arriving at a scene where the clock has stopped. Let us reconstruct the discovery. It is February 26th, 1959. A search party led by Mikhail Slobtsov is carving a path through the snow. They are looking for a group of 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute who were scheduled to send a telegraph on February 12th. That date came and went with nothing but static on the wire. From a distance, the searchers spot a small, dark shape against the blinding white expanse of the mountain slope. It is the tent. As the searchers approach, the first layer of high strangeness settles over the scene. The tent is partially collapsed, covered in snow, yet it remains the focal point of a terrifying mystery. It is not the tent of a group that was swept away by an avalanche in the traditional sense. It is a frozen artifact of panic. The searchers begin to excavate. They find the tent poles still standing. They find the group's supplies, axes, buckets, food, and alcohol, all untouched. They find boots. This is the first jarring piece of data. There are 9 sets of boots left inside the tent, in the sub-zero temperatures of the Urals, where the mercury dipped to minus 30 degrees Celsius that night. Boots are life. To discard them is to discard survival. Examination of the canvas reveals a detail that transforms this from a tragedy into a conundrum. The tent was not torn open by the wind or crushed by snow. It was slashed, and crucially, forensic analysis would later confirm that the cuts were made from the inside. Visualize the scene inside that cramped canvas shelter. 9 people are huddled together against the cold. Something happens. Something so immediate, so defying of logic and training, that they do not have time to untie the entrance flaps. Instead, they take knives and slash their way out into the dark, freezing void, leaving behind their shoes, their coats, and their reason. Outside the tent, the anomaly deepens. The searchers find footprints. These are not the chaotic, scrambling marks of people fleeing a physical attacker. They are organized. They are calm. There are 8 or 9 sets of tracks, some made by socks, some by a single felt boot, and some by bare feet. The footprints retain their structural integrity in the snow, preserving a moment of inexplicable behavior. They lead away from the safety of the tent and the supplies, moving down the slope toward the tree line, more than 1.5 kilometers away. The tracks do not diverge. The group walked together. They did not run. They walked methodically to their deaths. Following this trail of breadcrumbs leads the searchers to the edge of the forest, near a large Siberian cedar tree. Here, the silence of the scene becomes grim. Under the cedar, they find the remains of a small fire. It was a desperate, futile attempt at heat. Beside the remains of this fire lie the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Dorshenko. They are stripped to their underwear. Their bodies are frozen solid, dusted with a layer of snow that acts like a preservation agent. Their hands are burned. The branches of the cedar tree above them are broken up to a height of 5 meters. This suggests that in their final moments, one or both of them climbed the tree, snapping branches in a frantic attempt to see something, or perhaps to escape something, on the ground. The digital archaeology of this moment requires us to look at the distribution of clothing. The 2 men at the cedar were nearly naked. In hypothermia cases, there is a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, where the dying brain misinterprets the body's signals, and the victim feels intensely hot. However, the scene suggests something more complex. Their clothes had been cut off. The survivors, those who lived perhaps an hour or 2 longer, had scavenged the dead for warmth. Between the cedar tree and the tent, 3 more bodies are discovered in the days that followed. Igor Dyatlov, the leader of the expedition, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They are spaced out at intervals on the slope. Their positioning tells a heartbreaking story. They were not fleeing the tent. They were trying to crawl back to it. Dyatlov is found on his back, one hand clutching a branch of birch, his face looking toward the tent he slashed open hours before. Kolmogorova is found further up the slope. Slobodin is found between them. Slobodin's skull has a fracture, a small crack, but not enough to be fatal. These 3 died of hypothermia. Their bodies are stiff, turning into statues of ice in the gray light of the mountain. At this point in the investigation, the narrative is tragic, but seemingly explainable by natural forces. A panic, an escape, and the inevitable entropy of the cold. But the mountain had not yet revealed its darkest data points. It would take until May, when the spring thaw began to loosen the grip of the ice, to find the remaining 4 hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolvatov, and Nikolai Thyboxbrig knolls. They were found deep in a ravine, 75 meters from the cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of snow. This is where the incident shifts from a survival tragedy into the realm of the truly inexplicable. Unlike the others, these 4 died from massive internal trauma. Thyboxbrig knolls suffered a major skull fracture. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. The force required to cause such damage was compared by the medical examiner to the impact of a car crash. Yet, and this is the critical detail, there was no external soft tissue damage. It was as if they had been squeezed by a high-pressure hydraulic press. Their skin was not bruised or cut in a way that matched the broken bones beneath. The condition of these bodies adds a layer of grotesque surrealism to the scene. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue. She was also missing her eyes, part of her lips, and facial tissue. Semyon Zolotaryov was also missing his eyes, while natural decomposition and scavenging by small animals in the ravine can explain the missing soft tissue. The internal injuries defy the environment. They were in a ravine. There was no height to fall from that would generate the kinetic energy required to shatter a chest cavity without destroying the skin. Furthermore, traces of radiation were found on the clothing of 2 of the hikers in the ravine. Beta radiation, distinct and measurable. It was not background radiation. It was residue. Let us pause and look at the inventory of high strangeness we have collected thus far. We have a tent cut from the inside. We have 9 experienced hikers walking calmly into the freezing night without shoes. We have a fire that could not sustain them. We have 3 people dying while crawling back to safety. We have 4 people found months later with catastrophic internal injuries, consistent with a high-velocity impact, yet no external signs of violence. We have missing sensory organs. We have radiation. And we have the photographs. The cameras found in the tent provide a haunting, grainy record of the days leading up to the event. We see smiling faces. We see young men and women struggling through deep snow, playing mandolins, documenting their journey with the meticulousness of the academic mind. The images are black and white, high contrast, filled with the visual noise of film grain. They capture the camaraderie and the unsuspecting innocence of the group. The final frame on one of the rolls of film is a subject of intense debate. It is a blurry, overexposed shot. Some see a figure emerging from the darkness. Others see a light anomaly. Some argue it is merely a mistake, a shutter fired accidentally as the camera was dropped. But in the context of the aftermath, that final blur looks less like a mistake and more like a witness to the intrusion. The official Soviet investigation closed the case quickly. The cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. This phrase, compelling natural force, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic ambiguity. It admits that something killed them, but it refuses to define what that something was. It suggests a power beyond human agency, a force that cannot be prosecuted or understood, only feared. The bodies were returned to Sverdlovsk in zinc coffins. The funeral was tense. Family members noted that the skin of the victims had a strange, deep orange or brown discoloration, like old parchment. The incident was classified. The area was closed to hikers for 3 years. The silence of the mountain was restored, but it was now a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a crime scene where the perpetrator had vanished into the ether. What we are left with is a closed-room mystery where the room is a vast, open mountain range. The chronology of that night, minute by minute, breaks down under scrutiny. Why leave the tent? Why walk calmly? Why split up? Why the injuries in the ravine? The sensory details of the scene haunt the archives. The sound of the wind howling through the slashed canvas. The crunch of snow under bare feet. The crackling of the small fire under the cedar. The absolute crushing darkness of a remote Ural winter night. This was not merely a hiking accident. It was a collision between human fragility and an unknown variable. The Dyatlov Pass incident stands as a monument to the unknown, a glitch in the historical record where the inputs do not match the outputs. As we descend deeper into this analysis, we must keep the image of that tent in our minds, a fragile bubble of light and warmth in a hostile universe, suddenly breached by a terror so absolute that the only option was to step out into the void. This is the incident. The data points are fixed. The interpretation, however, is a labyrinth we are about to enter. Part 2. The context. To understand the architecture of a disaster, we must first understand the foundation upon which it was built. When we look at the Dyatlov Pass incident through the lens of modern sensibilities, we often make the mistake of projecting our own vulnerabilities onto the 9 hikers. We imagine them as casual adventurers, ill-equipped college students wandering into a hostile wilderness. This assumption is not only incorrect, it is a disservice to the memory of the group. To truly grasp the anomaly of their deaths, we must first appreciate the competence of their lives. The year was 1959. The Soviet Union was in the midst of the Khrushchev thaw. Stalin had been dead for 6 years, and the grip of total state terror had loosened, if only slightly. It was a time of paradoxical optimism. The launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957 had electrified the nation, proving that Soviet engineering could conquer the vacuum of space. There was a pervasive cultural belief that nature, no matter how harsh, was merely another variable be solved by the rational Soviet mind. The group led by Igor Dyatlov was a product of this specific cultural moment. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, an institution dedicated to forging the industrial future of the state. These were engineers, physicists, and radio technicians. Their worldview was defined by logic, schematics, and the tangible properties of the material world. They were not prone to superstition. They were the children of the atomic age. Furthermore, we must contextualize the activity itself. In the West, hiking is often viewed as a leisure activity, a way to decompress. In the Soviet Union of the 1950s, it was formalized as sport tourism. This was not a hobby. It was a state-sanctioned discipline with a rigorous bureaucratic structure. Trips were graded on difficulty. The expedition to Mount Autorten was classified as a Category 3 difficulty, the highest grade available at the time. To participate, one had to be certified. To lead, as Dyatlov did, required a mastery of logistics, topography, and survival mechanics. These 9 individuals were the elite of this discipline. They were conditioned to endure sub-zero temperatures, to navigate without landmarks, and to troubleshoot equipment failure with frozen fingers. When we analyze the timeline, we are watching experts at work, not amateurs. This makes the eventual total collapse of their cohesion all the more disturbing. Let us examine the material reality of their expedition. The equipment they carried acts as a time capsule of Soviet ingenuity and limitation. There was no Gore-Tex, no lightweight synthetic down, no GPS, and no satellite phones. Their survival depended on heavy, organic materials. They wore layers of wool and cotton. Their windbreakers were canvas. Their sleeping bags were often homemade, stitched together from heavy batting that became dangerously heavy when wet. We know from the inventory lists and diary entries that the group relied on a stove designed by Igor Dyatlov himself. It was a piece of custom engineering, a metal box of welded pipes intended to be suspended inside the tent to radiate heat. It was brilliant, but it was also a single point of failure. Constructing the tent involved a complex ritual of clearing snow, laying down skis for insulation, and carefully venting the stove. Every night was a battle against thermodynamics. The margin for error in the Northern Urals in February is non-existent. The group consisted of 10 members initially. Before Yudin turned back due to chronic joint pain. Yudin is a ghost in this narrative, the man who stepped off the train to the afterlife. The remaining 9 were a tight-knit unit, with one notable exception, Semyon Zolotaryov. Zolotaryov is a figure that frequently arrests the attention of digital investigators. He was significantly older than the others, 37 years old to their early 20s. He was an outsider, a survival instructor with a military background who had fought in the Great Patriotic War. His inclusion in the group was a late addition, necessary for him to gain a promotion in his teaching career. There is a dissonance surrounding Zolotaryov. While the students were idealistic and open, Zolotaryov remains a cipher. Post-mortem examinations revealed he had tattoos that were not standard for the era, including cryptic letters and symbols that have never been fully deciphered. Some researchers suggest he may have been associated with the NKVD or KGB, though this remains speculative. However, his presence changes the dynamic. It introduced a variable of military pragmatism into a group of academic idealists. If there was a human threat on that mountain, Zolotaryov was the one equipped to recognize it. Now look at the landscape. The Northern Urals act as a spine running through Russia, a physical barrier separating the European plains from the vastness of Siberia. It is a liminal space, a threshold between the known and the wild. The specific area they were traversing was the domain of the Mansi people, an indigenous group who have lived in symbiosis with the reindeer and the taiga for centuries. The destination was Mount Autorn. In the Mansi language, the name is often translated as "don't go there," though linguists argue it more accurately means mountain where the wind blows. The pass itself, where they would make their final camp, sits on the shoulder of Khalat Syakhl. This name is translated as Dead Mountain. While sensationalists love to claim this implies a curse, the Mansi context is more practical. It is a mountain where nothing grows, a barren peak of stone and scree where there is no game to hunt. It is dead because it cannot sustain life. The relationship between the hikers and the Mansi was documented as friendly. The diaries mention trading with them and admiring their effortless movement through the deep snow. However, the hikers were encroaching on a landscape that was layered with unseen boundaries. While the hikers saw a challenge to be conquered, the terrain itself was an active antagonist. The weather in the Urals is driven by cyclonic activity from the Arctic. Temperatures can drop from freezing to minus 30 degrees Celsius in a matter of hours. The wind on the exposed slopes of Khalat Syakhl behaves like a fluid, screaming over the ridge lines with the force of a shockwave. But there is another layer to this geography, one that is often obscured by the natural grandeur. The Soviet state was heavy in this region. To the south and west lay the Ivdalag, a network of gulag prison camps. Even in 1959, the memory of the camps was fresh, and the infrastructure remained. Escaped prisoners were a known reality, and special detachments of troops patrolled the taiga. The hikers were walking through a zone that was simultaneously a pristine wilderness and a vast, open-air prison yard. There is also the matter of the technological footprint. This was a region of secret cities and closed testing grounds. The Kishtim disaster, a catastrophic nuclear accident, had occurred only 2 years prior, a few hundred miles to the south. The fallout from that event was kept secret from the public, but the radiation was real. The sky above the Urals was frequently the stage for missile tests and high-altitude weather rocketry. This brings us to one of the most persistent and unsettling details of the context: the lights. In the weeks surrounding the incident, multiple witnesses, including other hiking groups and meteorological service personnel, reported seeing glowing orange spheres moving silently across the night sky. These were not hallucinations. They were logged in official reports. They suggest that the hikers were traversing a landscape that was being utilized for purposes far beyond their comprehension. We must also consider the photographic record. The Dyatlov group carried several cameras, primarily Zorky models, which were Soviet copies of the Leica. They also carried rolls of black and white film. Photography was a serious hobby for the group. They documented everything: the train ride, the truck depot, the slog through the snow, the setup of the tent. These photographs are the primary artifacts of the digital excavation. They possess a haunting quality, a graininess that feels like static. We see them laughing, posing, working. We see the camaraderie. But as the timeline advances, the photos become more sporadic. The final frames are blurry, overexposed, or taken in near total darkness. They represent the degradation of order. The camera, a machine of objective documentation, begins to fail just as the group's reality begins to fracture. The diaries, too, are essential. They display a wit and intelligence that makes the loss palpable. They discuss love, politics, and the philosophy of travel. They produced a satirical newspaper on the mountain, the Evening Autorn, poking fun at their own struggles. They were self-aware. They were alive. They were not trembling in fear of spirits. They were annoyed by the cold and proud of their progress. So we have the board set. We have 9 highly competent, rational individuals. We have a mysterious 10th man with a combat history. We have a landscape that is climatically hostile and culturally layered, with indigenous lore and state secrets. We have a piece of custom technology, the stove, that dictates their survival routine. And we have the overarching anxiety of the Cold War era, where the sky itself could be a testing ground for apocalypse. They moved into the valley of the Ospia River, leaving the tree line behind to attempt the pass. They were pushing the limits of their endurance, but they were within the parameters of their training. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they knew how to do. And yet, something broke the pattern. As we move to the incident itself, remember this context. Do not picture helpless victims. Picture a squad of engineers encountering a variable for which there was no schematic. Picture the collision of the rational Soviet world with a force that defied logic. The tragedy of the Dyatlov Pass is not just that they died. It is that they were the best of their generation, armed with the best knowledge of their time, and it was not enough. The silence of the pass was not empty. It was waiting. Part 3. The investigation. The silence of the Northern Ural Mountains was replaced by the scratching of fountain pens and the mechanical clatter of typewriters. When the rescue operation transitioned into a criminal investigation, the atmosphere shifted from one of desperate hope to bureaucratic confusion. The physical recovery of the bodies was only the prologue. What followed was an autopsy of logic itself, a procedural descent into a mystery that has resisted forensic science for more than 6 decades. To understand why this case remains an open wound in the psyche of internet sleuths and historians alike, we must look at the official documents produced in 1959. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was tasked with assembling a narrative from a scene that defied physics. The first 5 bodies found near the cedar tree and on the slope presented a tragic but somewhat understandable picture. Hypothermia was listed as the cause of death. They were underdressed, some in only socks or underwear, having fled the tent in a panic. The phenomenon of paradoxical undressing, where freezing victims feel a sudden, delirious wave of heat and strip off their clothes, was cited. Their skin was noted to have a strange orange or brownish tint, though modern pathologists suggest this was likely due to exposure to the elements and the mummifying effects of the wind, rather than anything chemical. However, the narrative shattered 3 months later, when the snow thawed enough to reveal the remaining 4 hikers deep in the ravine. The autopsies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, and Alexander Kolvatov changed the classification of the case entirely. Unlike the first group, these hikers had sustained catastrophic internal trauma. Thiboksbrignoles had a major skull fracture. Both Dubinina and Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs. The medical examiner, Dr. Boris Vozrozhdeny, compared the force required to cause such damage to a car crash. Yet, crucially, there was no external soft tissue trauma corresponding to these breaks. It was as if they had been squeezed by a hydraulic press. Then came the details that fuel nightmares. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, and facial tissue. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyes. While skeptics rightly point to scavenging animals or decomposition in the wet stream of the ravine, the imagery was permanent. It was visceral. It did not fit the story of a simple avalanche or a panic induced by wind. Ivanov also brought a Geiger counter to the scene. He found radioactive contamination on the clothing of at least 2 hikers. While the levels were not lethal, their presence in a remote mountain pass added a layer of high strangeness that the Soviet authorities were keen to suppress. The investigation was closed abruptly in May 1959. The official conclusion was a masterpiece of administrative evasion. The cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. The files were sent to a secret archive. The area was closed to skiers and hikers for 3 years. This is where the digital archaeology begins. For decades, these files sat gathering dust. But with the advent of the internet, the Dyatlov Pass incident found a new ecosystem in which to thrive. The digitization of the 1959 case files allowed a global hive mind to dissect the evidence. We are no longer looking at physical paper. We are looking at scans, high-resolution enhancements of grainy film, and translations of handwritten diaries. The digital footprint of the Dyatlov group is a paradox. They died before the digital age, yet they left behind a massive cache of data. Their cameras were recovered. The film was developed. We have photos of them setting up camp, laughing, posing with the tent. We have the final frame from Krivonishenko's camera, a blurry, overexposed shot of something glowing, or perhaps just a technical error. Online forums have become the modern investigation room. On sites like Reddit, specialized forums, and the extensive archives of dyatlovpass.com, thousands of users have spent millions of hours analyzing pixel grain. They adjust contrast on the photos of the tent. They map the slope using Google Earth. They cross-reference meteorological data from 1959 with modern weather models. This decentralized investigation has produced 3 primary categories of theories, each with its own digital following. First, the infrasound theory. This posits that the wind, interacting with the specific dome shape of Khalat Seattle, created a Kármán vortex street. This physical phenomenon can generate infrasound, a low-frequency vibration that causes nausea, dread, and irrational panic in humans. The theory suggests the hikers were driven mad by the sound of the mountain itself, fleeing the tent to escape a physical sensation of doom. It is elegant and scientific, but it fails to explain the crushing injuries found in the ravine. Second, the military testing theory. This is supported by the testimony of another hiking group camping 30 miles south, who reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky on the night of the incident. Lev Ivanov, the original investigator, later admitted in an interview during the 1990s that he had been pressured to remove all references to these flying objects from the official report. Proponents of this theory suggest the group was caught in the blast zone of a parachute mine or a failed weapon test, explaining the radiation and the internal trauma. The internet has been instrumental here, digging up declassified Soviet military schedules and launch records from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. However, no concrete record of a launch on that specific date and trajectory has ever been definitively proven. Third, the avalanche or slab slide theory. In 2021, Swiss researchers used code originally designed for rendering snow in Disney movies to simulate the conditions on the slope. They concluded that a small, delayed slab avalanche could have occurred, crushing the tent and causing the initial injuries, forcing the group to cut their way out. This is currently the most scientifically accepted explanation. It fits the angle of the slope and the snow accumulation. Yet the digital archaeologists remain unsatisfied. The forum threads continue to grow. Why? Because the avalanche theory does not fully account for the behavior of the group after they left the tent. These were experienced hikers. If a snow slab hit the tent, why did they walk nearly a mile down the slope in their socks? Why did they split up? Why did they build a fire under the cedar tree, only for some to die of hypothermia, while others moved deeper into the ravine? The evidence we have is a collection of fragments. We have the diaries, which stop abruptly. We have the photos, which show a happy group hours before death. We have the tent, slashed from the inside, suggesting an immediate, frantic need to escape something inside that canvas shelter. The reason this case remains unsolved is not a lack of evidence, but an excess of contradictory data. The physical trauma suggests violence. The lack of footprints suggests isolation. The radiation suggests technology. The environment suggests nature. When we engage in digital archaeology on the Dyatlov Pass, we are analyzing the gaps between the data points. We are looking at the timeline of death. Consider the campfire under the cedar. The remains of the fire suggest it was kept going for some time. The two bodies found there, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, were found stripped to their underwear. Their clothes were found on the other hikers deeper in the woods. This implies a timeline, a sequence of death. The first two died. The survivors, freezing and desperate, scavenged the clothes from their dead friends to try and survive. This is the darkest aspect of the analysis. It paints a picture not of a sudden, instant calamity, but of a slow, agonizing struggle in the pitch black of the Ural winter. It transforms the incident from a momentary accident into a prolonged siege against the cold. The failure of the initial investigation was a failure of imagination and a restriction of protocol. The police reports were designed to close a case, not to solve a puzzle. They needed a box to put the file in. They chose the box marked natural force. But the internet does not have a filing cabinet. It has infinite space for speculation. We see the persistence of the mystery in the way the evidence is constantly re-examined. Recently, users have enhanced the images of the Zolotaryov body, debating the existence of a notebook he was rumored to be carrying. Others analyze the autopsy reports, translating obscure Soviet medical terminology to see if the missing tongue was truly ripped out or simply decomposed. The digital footprint of the Dyatlov Pass incident is a testament to human curiosity and our refusal to accept the irrational. We demand a cause and effect. We demand that 9 experienced trekkers did not simply walk into the snow to die for no reason. But the mountain offers no testimony. The cedar tree, which the hikers climbed in a desperate attempt to see the camp or perhaps to escape something on the ground, still stands. The slope is still there. In the final analysis of the investigation, we are left with a feeling of deep unease. The police reports give us the what, the frozen bodies, the cut tent, the radiation. The forums and theories try to give us the why. But the gap between them is where the horror lies. It is a liminal space in history, a threshold that was crossed and cannot be uncrossed. The investigation officially ended in 1959. It was reopened and closed again by the Russian Federation in 2019. And yet, the questions remain louder than ever. As we stare at the black and white photographs of the hikers' smiling faces, digitized and preserved on servers around the world, we are participating in a digital vigil. We are keeping the signal alive, hoping that somewhere in the static, a pattern will emerge. But perhaps some things are not meant to be solved. Perhaps the Dyatlov Pass is a reminder that despite our satellites, our forensic algorithms, and our global connectivity, the world still holds dark corners where logic goes to die. This concludes part 3. In the final entry, we will attempt to synthesize these fragments into a final cohesive narrative and reflect on the legacy of the 9 who never returned. Part 4. The aftermath. The earth of Sverdlovsk received 9 bodies in the spring of 1959. But it could not swallow the questions that clung to them like the frost on their parkas. The funerals were a strange, dissonant affair. Family members, paralyzed by a grief that had no closure, stood beside open graves while whispers circulated through the crowd. The whispers were driven by the sight of the hiker's skin, which some witnesses described as deeply tanned, almost brick red or orange, a jarring contrast to the pale winter sun of the Urals. Others noted the gray hair on heads that should have been youthful. Whether these details were the result of natural decomposition, exposure to the elements, or something more extrinsic remains a point of contention in the archival record. What is certain is that the Soviet bureaucratic machine moved with a brutal, efficient finality. On May 28, 1959, the criminal case was officially closed. The conclusion offered by lead investigator Lev Ivanov was a masterpiece of vagueness. He attributed the deaths to a compelling natural force, a phrase that has haunted the case for over 6 decades. It was a conclusion that explained nothing and everything simultaneously. It absolved the state. It absolved the hikers of incompetence, and it placed the blame on the shoulders of the mountain itself. The files were sent to a secret archive. The location of the incident was declared off limits to skiers and explorers for 3 years. This silence, enforced by the Iron Curtain, acted as an incubator for the mystery. In the absence of data, folklore took root. As we examine the legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident, we must navigate a landscape that is less about geography and more about the psychology of the unknown. The tragedy did not end when the last heartbeat faded in the snow. It mutated. It became a signal lost in the noise of history, only to be amplified by the digital age. The unanswered questions are not merely gaps in the timeline. They are structural failures in our understanding of reality. Let us look at the forensic anomalies that refuse to align with the avalanche theory or the infrasound hypothesis. First, the radiation. It is a detail often exaggerated, yet it exists in the case files. Radiological testing on the clothes of the hikers found contamination on a sweater and the lower part of a pair of trousers. While the levels were not lethal, their presence in the pristine wilderness of the Northern Urals is an aberration. Explanations range from laboratory cross-contamination to the idea that the hikers had handled radioactive materials in their academic work. However, in the context of the sphere of light sightings reported by other hiking groups that same night, the radiation becomes a data point that refuses to be dismissed. Then there is the matter of the internal injuries sustained by Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thybok's Brignoles. The autopsies described trauma comparable to a car crash. Yet, there were no external soft tissue wounds corresponding to such force. Their ribs were crushed, and their skulls fractured, as if squeezed by a high-pressure gradient. If an avalanche or a slab of snow caused this, why did it selectively target only some of the group? And why did it leave no external bruising? Furthermore, the condition of the bodies found in the ravine presents a macabre puzzle. The missing eyes and the missing tongue of Dubinina are clinically explained by the activity of scavengers and decomposition in a flowing stream. Yet the precision of the absence, combined with the other high strangeness elements of the case, invites speculation that feels almost instinctual. It taps into a primal fear of predation by something that does not leave footprints. We must also consider the tent. The tent is the central artifact of this mystery. It was cut from the inside. This fact alone dismantles the logic of a panic induced by an external natural threat. If the mountain is rumbling, if the snow is cracking, one unlaces the door. One does not take a knife and slash through the canvas wall unless the door is blocked, or unless the threat is already inside, or perhaps unless the perception of reality within that tent had become so distorted that the canvas wall represented the only escape from a localized madness. Today, the Dyatlov Pass has become a site of pilgrimage and a commodity. The location, once a remote coordinate of tragedy, is now a destination. It exists in a state of liminality. It is a graveyard, a crime scene, and a tourist attraction. Metal plaques and memorials mark the rock, imposing a human narrative on a landscape that is aggressively indifferent to human life. In the digital realm, the incident has achieved a form of immortality. The photographs recovered from the hikers' cameras are perhaps the most haunting artifacts in the history of internet sleuthing. As a digital archaeologist, I view these images not just as evidence, but as corrupted memories. We see them setting up camp. We see them laughing, their faces framed by the fur of their hoods. We see the blurry, grainy textures of 1959 film stock. These images are frozen in a perpetual before. They are the last transmission of a doomed vessel. The most analyzed image, the 33rd frame on Krivonishenko's roll of film, shows a blurry light, or perhaps a figure moving through the darkness. It is a Rorschach test for the observer. Some see a yeti, some see a soldier, some see a technical error in the developing process. It is a visual representation of the void. The media landscape surrounding the pass is a clutter of noise. Documentaries, podcasts, and forums recycle the same facts, degrading the signal with each iteration. The site itself has been mapped by drones and simulated in three-dimensional software. In 2021, Swiss researchers used code designed for simulating snow dynamics in Disney movies to prove that a slab avalanche was mathematically possible. And yet, the math does not satisfy the soul. This brings us to the philosophical core of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Why are we still obsessed with it? Why do millions of people who have never set foot in Russia, let alone the Urals, lie awake at night theorizing about 9 students who died over 60 years ago? It is because the Dyatlov Pass represents a breach in the contract we think we have with the modern world. We believe that if we have enough data, enough science, and enough logic, we can explain anything. We believe that death, while inevitable, should be understandable. The Dyatlov Pass denies us this comfort. It is a locked room mystery, where the room is the size of a mountain range. It forces us to confront the concept of the sublime, not in the romantic sense of beauty, but in the archaic sense of terror. The sublime is nature so vast, so powerful, and so alien that it annihilates the self. The hikers were competent. They were young, strong, and prepared. They did everything right, and they still died in terror, without their shoes, fleeing into the freezing dark. This narrative terrifies us because it implies that competence is no shield against the unknown. It implies that there are forces, be they geological, military, or paranormal, that can descend upon us without warning and leave behind a tableau that defies interpretation. The site today stands silent. The wind still howls through the pass with the same tone it held in 1959. The snow still creates the exact same patterns on the slope of Khalat Siakl. The mountain has not changed. It does not remember Igor Dyatlov. It does not remember the screams or the flare of the magnesium flash. As we archive this file, we are left with a sensation of static. The answers we have found are merely placeholders. The slab avalanche theory provides a mechanism for the snow, but it does not explain the behavior. The military testing theory explains the secrecy, but not the injuries. The infrasound theory explains the panic, but not the radiation. We are trying to assemble a puzzle where the pieces come from different boxes. Some pieces are forensic facts. Some are Soviet propaganda. Some are internet folklore. They will never form a complete picture. Perhaps that is the legacy of the Dyatlov Pass. It serves as a memento mori for the information age. It is a reminder that despite our satellites, our DNA sequencing, and our global connectivity, there are still corners of this world that remain dark. There are still nights where the wind sounds like a voice, and the only response is to cut your way out of the safety you built and run into the cold. The file remains open, not on a desk in Moscow, but in the collective mind of humanity. We keep looking at the photos. We keep scanning the grain of the film, hoping that if we look hard enough, the blurry figure in the trees will finally come into focus. But it never does. The resolution is too low. The time is too distant. And the silence of the Northern Urals is absolute. This concludes our analysis of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The coordinates are fixed. The history is written in ice. But the truth remains adrift, caught somewhere between the tree line and the stars.